Betsy had big brown eyes and an even bigger smile, a mother of 3 girls in her mid-50s. Now, at the time, I was a fellow at Washington University in St. Louis, doing, pretty good place, thank you, doing a combined geriatric and nutritional science fellowship. So what was I doing? I was looking at the interface between brain function and body composition. Betsy was one of my favorite participants. And I imaged Betsy's brain, mother of 3. She'd always struggled to lose the same 20 pounds. Yo-yo dieted her entire life. You guys know someone like that? I know you do. Is that someone you? I imaged Betsy's brain, and it looked like an Alzheimer's brain. And I knew that one day, as I was going through those rounds on the nursing homes, on the dementia ward, Betsy was going to be there. We failed her. We failed Betsy. We focused on the pathology of fat, told her to restrict calories, just keep eating less, fix this body fat issue. But what happened? We destroyed her muscle in the process. We destroyed her metabolism, and unfortunately, we damaged her brain. So what did I do? Well, I said, this can't be it. There's more to this story, right? We have other treatment options, right? Do you want to know what I was told? No. This is the standard of care. This is how we treat obesity. Well, you know what? That answer wasn't good enough for me. And that answer shouldn't be good enough for you. And I realized that we got this all wrong, that we had been trying to fix this disease of obesity for the last 50 years. What if we were trying to fix the wrong disease? What if we don't have an obesity epidemic? What if we have a midlife muscle crisis? We have been focusing on fixing pathology of fat when we need to focus on the health and the strength of our muscle. Body fat is symptomology of impaired muscle. Why not shift this to a muscle-centric perspective and actually move the needle for a lifetime? We focus on muscle mass. We focus on health, dietary protein, and strength. Muscle-centric medicine is root cause medicine. We have to change this perspective. We are not over fat. In fact, we are under muscled. How do we make sense of all this? How do we make sense of a muscle-centric perspective? This is a cross-sectional area of the thigh. It looks like a marbled steak, doesn't it? You can see C on there is a healthy skeletal muscle, a young, healthy skeletal muscle that is active. E is an older, 66-year-old male. That's also a healthy skeletal muscle. You can see it looks a lot less like a marbled steak. D. Now that is what likely 73% of the population looks like. That is skeletal muscle disease. It doesn't have to happen, yet it happens first. Okay, so this is a busy slide. I just want to point out a few things. We talk about insulin resistance, we talk about elevated blood sugar, we talk about elevated triglycerides as if there's some nebulous thing. Last time I checked, you cannot exercise your liver, but what you can do is you can exercise your muscle. Insulin resistance, one of the primary points of insulin resistance is skeletal muscle. Insulin resistance has been shown to start in skeletal muscle as young as 18 years of age or less. Did you know that skeletal muscle is the largest endocrine organ in the body? What makes skeletal muscle so valuable? Well, it's your metabolic sink. 80% of glucose disposal begins in skeletal muscle. You gotta empty the suitcase. One reason why exercise is so important, carbohydrate use is skeletal muscle. We talk all about carbs. We talk about carbs, we talk about the liver. What about muscle? Lipid oxidation. Fatty acid oxidation occurs skeletal muscle. Jamie was talking about if you fall, you break a hip, the amino acid reservoir, your body armor, skeletal muscle. What about myokines? When you contract skeletal muscle, it does so much more than nutrient partitioning. It secretes myokines. Myokines are proteins that travel throughout the body. We often hear about how important exercise is for the brain and the bone and the body. Well, one reason it is because this is what skeletal muscle does. Can you imagine what happens for a lifetime of yo-yo dieting, destroying skeletal muscle, not knowing what to eat, not because you didn't try, but because you didn't know? Muscle is the organ of longevity. And here's what I know. Whatever it is that you're fighting for in your life, whatever it is that matters most to you, you will become more capable, you will become stronger, you will become physically and mentally resilient the stronger your muscle is. I believe that we are all trying to do what we know to be true. And many of you sitting here have struggled, confusion, maybe even eating the same things that you did when you were in high school. Well, this worked when I was on the high school wrestling team. I'm going to do it. We have to change our perspective and adapt our diet and our training. So very quickly, this is what happens as we age. Unfortunately, it is not a linear process. We lose testosterone, we lose growth hormone. But skeletal muscle is a nutrient-sensing organ. Skeletal muscle is affected by these changes in hormones. So, yeah, sex hormones decrease, insulin resistance increases, but protein signaling decreases. Skeletal muscle is the organ system that determines and senses quality of the diet. So training and eating the way that you did in your 20s is not going to serve you going forward. This is not inevitable. You can change this, and you can change this today. And you know what? You know why this affects me so much? When I saw Betsy's brain, I realized that we failed her. I failed her, the medical society failed her, the community at large failed her. Nobody gave her the advice to protect her muscle at all costs. Nobody told her to prioritize dietary protein and do resistance exercise. Had we done that, had I done that, I could have improved her blood pressure. I could have lowered her triglycerides. I could have protected her brain and the metabolic implications on her brain. But I didn't know better. I'm never going to let that happen again. So, what are the two ways to stimulate muscle? Exercise and diet. Only 23% of individuals are meeting their daily exercise requirements. 23%. Last time I checked, 100% of people eat. When people talk about exercise and skeletal muscle, is it true that it is a more robust stimulus than diet? Yes, it is. The challenges of physical activity to skeletal muscle will absolutely move the needle. Current guidelines are 0.8 grams per kilogram, which is the RDA. Nina so graciously pointed out that this is actually the minimum to prevent deficiencies. Yet, when we're sick, and by the way, the RDA for vitamin C is 60 milligrams, and when we're sick, we don't hesitate for a moment to take more vitamin C or more of these vitamins that potentially could take us out of illness and sickness. Yet, when we're sick, do we think, I need to up my protein. I need to up the very nutrients that will improve my survivability. Why do we need protein? It's not actually the protein that we need. It is the amino acids, and there are 20, 9 of which are essential, and there are some that are limiting, specifically limiting in plant foods, specifically for skeletal muscle as the organ of longevity. We need branched chain amino acids, specifically leucine. So let's look at the big picture. The essential roles for amino acids. Number 1, building blocks for body protein. Makes sense. Now, the second interesting aspect of protein is that it is a diverse metabolic signal. Every single one of those amino acids, which, by the way, most people don't talk about it. We look at the back of a food label and all we see is total protein. That couldn't be further from the truth. Each one of those amino acids has a unique metabolic role, yet we fail to identify that. When we think about dietary protein, oftentimes we think about how much should we eat, how much is good for me, what kinds. This is the typical meal pattern for Americans. Again, potentially not this group, but perhaps if you're keto. Maybe you had a low-protein breakfast. Maybe you had, I don't know, 1 egg and some butter. Maybe lunch, you had a turkey sandwich. And then dinner, you finally sat down with Sean Baker and had your robust amount of protein. What does this do? Well, this is a standard meal pattern. Take a look around. How can we correct that? We can correct it by distributing dietary protein that is high quality. And I'm going to give you absolute take-home advice that you are going to implement at your next meal. We have an opportunity on a meal-to-meal basis to correct metabolic function. That is profound. And this is going to move us into a new frontier of thinking about amino acids. Hit a protein group and a carbohydrate group, and this was breakfast. So breakfast, dietary protein in breakfast, this is where the research is. This is where all the studies, to my knowledge, have been done. Why? You're coming out of an overnight fast. It is easy. There are not confounding variables. So let's see what happened when the protein group, you can see here, is 33 grams of protein, 10 grams of carbohydrates, or 10 grams of, the protein group had 33 grams of protein, 39 grams of carbohydrates. The carbohydrate group had 10 grams of protein and 57 grams of carbohydrates. This sounds like a Wheaties breakfast. What happened? All he did in this study was adjust and account for breakfast. He changed the amino acids for breakfast. What happened to body composition? There was an 8% greater weight loss, 18% greater fat loss, and protection of lean body mass. Skeletal muscle is the organ of longevity. You must protect that at all costs. You can protect it by transitioning the way that you are eating and nailing that first meal of the day. So here's your take-home message. Here's what each and every one of you is going to do. The first meal after you're coming out of an overnight fast, you're going to have between 30 and 45 grams of dietary protein. You cannot go wrong with this. Your middle meal, I don't really care. I mean, I care if it's like Sour Patch Kids or something else, but it can be a low protein dose. It could be 10 grams. It could be 12. It could be 15, 35. The goal is not for muscle protein synthesis at that middle meal. From my perspective, it is about managing hunger. And if you are eating a robust diet, then you can get away with that first and that last meal correctly. That last meal, this is where you sit down with Dr. Sean Baker and you have 45 to 55 grams before you go into that overnight fast to protect skeletal muscle. The evidence can support this. Protein does have an impact on insulin. Look at the bottom of this. So this is an equal amount. Protein's impact on insulin has 20% that the impact glucose does. Protein does stimulate insulin, preformed phase 1 insulin release. Negligible. This is not a reason to not consume dietary protein. To summarize some of the metabolic advantages of dietary protein with reduced carbohydrate intake, it improves body composition, protects skeletal muscle, targets fat loss, increases metabolic rate. People talk a lot about how it increases metabolic rate. It likely increases metabolic rate because of muscle protein synthesis. Enhances satiety. What else can it do? It can reverse metabolic syndrome. It can improve cognitive performance, decrease triglycerides, of course, when carbohydrates are controlled. increase HDL, increase LDL size, decrease fasting blood glucose. You guys get the message. We're going to understand the big picture. How many grams of protein do I need per day? Probably more optimal, 1.6 grams per kg. I don't want anyone going lower than that. I put up here if you're an endurance athlete, strength athlete, but again, 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. Number 2, your grams per meal. You're going to nail it. And you know why you're going to nail it? Because it's so easy. There's a lot of things in life hard. This is not one of them. And finally, you are going to understand the quantity of the dietary protein that you need, the quality of the protein that you are consuming, and how you are distributing.